Hell yeah.
Hello everyone, this is Jose Herrera with the O3XX series. Tonight's special guest is Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army retired, Daniel E. Harris. A little bit about Lieutenant Colonel Harris. Lieutenant Colonel Harris is a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces and lives in Tobiana and the Pocono Mountains of Northeast Pennsylvania. He is founder and CEO of Muddy Boots Leadership LLC, a Crestcom franchise. Muddy Boots is a leadership development organization that specializes in developing managers and supervisors into leaders. Lieutenant Colonel Harris is also an adjunct professor teaching graduate level business courses for the Masters of Science degree in organizational leadership at Mercy College. He has led diverse organizations and teams to accomplish organizational goals. He has leadership development expertise in talent management with a focus on identifying and nurturing leadership potential to posture and accelerate managers to work in executive level roles. He has strategic level experience from working at the DoD and can leverage experiential learning solutions through teaching, coaching, and mentoring leaders to perform at their best to achieve lasting impact on people and organization. Lieutenant Colonel Harris has developed learning solutions based on learning theory and was responsible for implementing and delivering leadership development strategies, performance management, and onboarding officers and NCOs in multiple Army organizations. He has directed and was responsible for the leadership programs for his staff, as well as service members from both foreign and U.S. military, with responsibility to measure the learning, the impact of the program, and leadership strategy. Lieutenant Colonel Harris is a proven leader with the ability to identify, develop, and leverage junior leaders' strengths and cross level competencies to capitalize on individual experiences and motivate teams, as well as focus and execute the strategic vision to achieve his unit organizational goals in both the continental US and outside the continental US. Lieutenant Colonel Harris is also the author of On Guard, The Four Pillars of Leadership.
Because of the experience and having walked that road in the NCOs, man, those guys are worth their weight in gold. And I think because I was prior enlisted before I went into the officer corps, there are a few of us out there that have both experiences. And I think because of that, I'm not patting myself on the shoulder, but I think we make better officers. It's just my just my 2 cents worth. Just you really get to know and appreciate the experience from the NCOs, and just bringing that level up to the officer experience makes us well-rounded, and we can relate to many situations much better. So
In
I,
the,
I
oh yeah, in the Marine Corps we call them Mustangs. I'm not too sure if
Mustang.
they use that term, but yeah. So, and that's always been the experience. Typically,
Mhm.
who served, enlisted prior to going into officer candidate school, usually
Yeah,
played a kind of well balanced
absolutely.
character and personality amongst one another.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and it was kind of a good synchronicity. Earlier this past week, I had a conversation with another Mustang officer.
Hmm.
His name is Dr. Richard Hubank, and
Okay.
he served 30 years. He works with the Department of Homeland Security to counter terrorism. And
Hmm.
my mentor, who really, Mark Mosier, retired Marine Master Sergeant, served most of his time with an infantry recon and force recon, and then did some other kind of work early on.
Interesting. Not cutting you off. Hold that thought. I know a Mark Moser who
All
was
right.
he was a full bird colonel, and he was my plans chief. When we in a plans shop, when we were writing the operations order for the 42nd Infantry Division at Fort Drum, heading into OIF 3. So he was a Mark Moser.
Yeah,
Um,
and I saw that in the book too. I said, "Oh, smoke one letter shy of the last name, the full last name, Hoosier."
gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, Mark mentored me up, and he schooled me up, and Mark is taking on certain other endeavors right now in terms of
Hmm.
building certain kinds of infrastructure for operators or potential candidates pursuing that kind of activity in their
Yes.
occupations. And
Yes.
so I've kind of tapped into his network, and we were discussing just general things. But one of the topics that came up, because most of what I do, I have two day jobs. One of them is working with is a academic and an academic and behavioral interventionist within the school districts in Pender County, North Carolina, and then I
Okay.
also do peer support with combat veterans as well as civilians. And so
Excellent.
most of my work and my upcoming book and this series dives into the domain of mental health.
Mm.
And so, when we talk about things like leadership, obviously those things have an impact. And
Yes.
in the Marine Corps, I know my experience, with leadership, it came in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And you definitely knew which ones were the good leaders and which ones were the bad ones. And I'm not trying to be biased, but it's one of those things. And early on, whenever was Frank talked to me over email about the book,
Yes.
one of the first things that came to my mind was, I'm curious to know if Colonel Harris understands the language, and this is the language that I'm talking about. So in our discussion with Dr. Eubank, he mentioned there's a difference between leading and managing. You manage
Absolutely.
logistics and administration, and you lead
Yes.
with your heart. And one of the things that pulled me really close to reading your book was you talk a very foreign language. And what I mean by that is virtue ethics, like CLIP, for example, courage, love,
Yes.
integrity, and passion. That's
Yes.
very, very foreign in today's kind of subjective, commodified, relativistic, emotive language of everyday society.
My hope is that by the time I exit this earth, I would have preached that gospel enough, my friend, that enough leaders will begin to internalize that and think about it and incorporate it into their leadership styles, because it's extremely important. To come back to a point you raised, you know, we manage our processes, assembly lines. We can manage our construction projects and all those things. But you have to lead men and people and women. You have to lead men. You cannot manage people. And once you bring in that aspect of leadership and you're dealing with people, then the entire construct changes. And you cannot bring in that construct that you would use to manage things and material to doing that with people. The closest you would come, which is perhaps a bridge, would be managers. So I give this example to differentiate between the two. If you showed up to work 3 times late in 1 week and your manager cuts your pay, that will motivate you to show up on time, right? So managers will motivate, but your leaders will inspire. And you inspire people, you cannot inspire things. You lead people, you cannot lead things. You kind of see the pattern uh, in those, in that train of thought.
Absolutely.
So absolutely, yeah.
And this is I kind of want to, before we get into the chronology of who Lieutenant Colonel Harris is, I do have a question. Have you ever heard of the term hyperreality?
A little bit,
Okay.
not too conversant with it. A little bit.
So in the early 80s, Jean Baudrillard wrote a book called Simulation and Simulacra. And one of the major proponents of simulation and simulacra was that because of the advent of commodification and consumerism, that we've kind of lost an original reference to what reality is. And so he says that representation precedes reality. And part of the ongoing research in the book that I'm writing is that there have been specific historical markers within American culture that have kind of led to this degradation or deconstruction of virtue ethics or just the ethical component. And this is one of the claims that I make, is that as a result of technological advancement, we're increasingly becoming connected to technology and software. And because we have these major historical moments, that the language of virtue is completely lost in its reference. And that, and one of the things that I make clear is that it doesn't matter what government strategies or what DoD strategies are being implemented. So right now they're doing the whole of society, the whole of government approach. And as a result of hyperreality amongst narrative warfare, mimetic warfare, increasing cyber attacks, influence operations, mechanisms such as things like your book or things that I'm writing are always going to be constantly undermined. And at some point, and this is the claim that I make, is that within 20 or 40 years, if we don't have major institutional kinds of reform where we bring back these kind of old traditional methods of ethics and morals, that we're going to lose a complete history and reference to who we are as Americans. And my question is do you feel that as a result of all these complexities and dynamics taking place in the United States currently, do you think that somehow this language of virtue and this idea of leadership is being undermined?
Very much so. It's contributing to it for sure. And there's a major component that we are just beginning to embark upon in this mechanistic mindset, and that is artificial intelligence, both semi and autonomous. Okay. And I address that as a domain in multi-domain leadership. And it speaks very briefly, not in depth as you've just described it very succinctly, but briefly, to being able to lead with a multi-domain mindset. And I'll just reference back to AI, right? how do you effectively lead with a mindset, uh, somewhat purely, when you have these external considerations, such as in a semi-autonomous environment, or in a fully autonomous environment, where human input becomes contrary to, it depends on how advanced a particular machine has learned and incorporated learning, and is now making decisions against you. I fear to think about that. Okay, so that's very, very important when we think about the the old standards of ethics and morals, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I refer to it as old, but those are, that's a standard, that's unchanged, regardless of what time or era we find ourselves in. That remains constant, right? So, how do you maintain that, or make your decisions, being an ethical leader, right, in a environment such as AI, or in any one of the other domains that you find yourselves in? It's important to think about these things beforehand, and not have, excuse the expression, an oh shit moment when it's facing you. Right? It's also important to have that as part of your DNA, because then you will not be conflicted when you have to make a decision as to one way or the other. It's also important to have thought about these things, and it's incorporated as part of your DNA, because the one constant throughout all of this, time, era, domains, is people. It's going to be people. And leadership is about people, right? Getting people to do what you want them to do. Of course, without resorting to humiliation, intimidation, fear, those other aspects. That's not leading. That's bullying people. Somebody. So, with respect to that, thought process of yours, I'm really looking forward to get more into the details of hyperreality. It's it really aligns with my thinking about leadership, and the clip, and the domains of leading.
Absolutely. I've always said that, and Tyler, I've talked with Tyler. For me, leadership, has always been a kind of philosophy where I never ask someone to do something that I'm not willing to do first. And with this project that we've kind of started, and with the literature that I'm doing, there are other claims that I make. And one of the biggest ones that I make, aside hyperreality, that's just like one mechanism of
Mhm.
of kind of tackling today's mental health crisis, the epidemic within suicide with amongst veterans, is that at some point, social, epigenetic, and mimetic entropy is going
Mhm.
to affect this to the point where, one, there's not going to be a solid workforce, there's not going to be a potential pool of recruits, and more importantly, there's not going to be education or educators, scholars, intellectuals, as a result of increasingly weaponized narratives and mimetics. And what I mean by mimetics is merely the propagation, the transmission, and the imitation of specific kinds of information, specifically culturally exploited information. And I know this past, like 2020, for example, for Second Battalion Marines, was a technically, if you want to go back all the way starting in 2012, our unit has suffered quite a bit to the suicide epidemic. And one of the I'm not, I know everyone deals with these kinds of things in their own way, but for some of the guys that have been in the fight, grinding it out, talking with one another, keeping in touch, going above and beyond. Most recently, we had an individual who decided to check out, and a result of it, some pretty high profile battalion commanders stepped forward. And what really upset me about it was, where have these individuals been? Where have they been throughout this fight? Why now? Is it because this was a high profile case? Like,
Probably.
what's going on?
Probably. Yep, absolutely. Probably. I'll tell you, my philosophy as a battalion commander, well, I mean, I started as a platoon leader. Again, very lucky to have worked through the steps. So platoon leader, company executive officer, company commander, battalion exec, battalion commander, and so on. I maintain one very simple philosophy. As the leader, I have to be the hardest working member of the team. And from second lieutenant through captain, even as a battalion commander, very simple thing as the APFT, the semi-annual APFT, banging out push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run. I tell you, when your troops, and I consider this a compliment, when your troops are saying to you, "God damn, sir, do you have to outperform everyone all the time?" And my response was, no, but I have to be the hardest working member on this team. And that starts with doing our PT test. You got 2 minutes in the Army standards to knock out as many push-ups as you can properly. Roll over 2 minutes, do as many sit-ups as you can, and then get up and run a 2-mile run as fast as you can. Very simple instructions and metrics to perform. So instead of getting out there, and I would hear soldiers would ask, well, what's my requirement for my age group? Because it's stepped and rated. And I would say, wrong answer, hero. The question is not what's the requirement for my age group. You got 2 minutes and you stay down in a front leaning rest position for the entire 2 minutes. And when the time is up, you get up and you count your time. Instead of, well, I'm supposed to do 50, I've done 50, and you stand up and you walk back to the back of the line. That is a method, but I will submit to you that is not the right method. Because to achieve the minimums, yeah, you'll pass. But let me ask you this. When you're in a firefight, do you want the guy or gal next to you who, during the marksman training, achieved the minimum? Or do you want the guy who was the expert shooter? If you get wounded on the battlefield and a medic shows up, do you want the medic who achieved the minimum in combat medic school? Or do you want the medic that exceeded the standards and got in all his courses? And with a conversation like that, it drives the point home that mediocrity is not tolerated. I mean, you've met your standard, got it, but you have to be the hardest working member on the team, and you're not going to nurture and promote a culture like that if you're not leading from the front. Very simply. So I would tell them, the leader has to be the hardest working member on the team. And it's a shame with the suicide rate, and I attribute it right back to leadership. So just follow along with this. John C. Maxwell wrote in 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership that leadership rises and falls on everything. And you think about that for a moment, it's very, very true. Leadership does rise and fall on everything. I attribute everything to leadership, every single thing. One of the things I talk about frequently in this comes back to the issue of the social and mental things we deal with. Just take the example of COVID, right? this pandemic has come in and surgically attacked. And you would know exactly what I'm talking about if you're going out on a surgical mission or conducting a surgical strike, right? Very important aspects of our humanity, mainly the social piece. So many of the things that we defined our existence by have been attacked by this COVID virus. And those things relate to our resilience, okay, as human beings. Think about it. Some people like to go to church on Sundays. That's been cut out. Some people like to go to the gym with a group of guys or gals after work or what have you. That's been cut out. Some people like to go to happy hour, sit and have beers, talk. That's been cut out. Some families have play dates with the kids in parks or what have you. That's been cut out. Families with pets have pet dates with the families, and that's been on and on and on. Leaving you now to have to sit at home, isolated, and the very next thing that comes on is depression. And that depression is not only a loss of the break with the social construct, but now loss of jobs, loss of homes, loss of loved ones in hospitals, in hospice, in nursing homes. You can't even visit them, right? And the end result of those experiences, those people die without having the benefit of you even being around their bedside or holding their hands. Now, as a leader, what's your role in this and how do you manage that loss? Well, loss is the same as change. You would agree with me. Loss equals change. There's a change in something. So this is where the leadership comes in. Leaders need to know how to manage change. You have to know how to manage that change in order to effectively and adequately deal with the depressive state leading to the suicide, leading to all the other effects we talked about. Simple things that teenagers cutting themselves, people resorting to abusing alcohol and other things. So a leader's inability to deal with the change on their team, okay, will definitely impact their mission, their objective, anything that they're trying to do. And if you think that there is not a connection, think again. Try to accomplish your mission and don't deal with specialist so-and-so's issues that come from maybe with a spouse or a child, okay? Try to conduct your mission and Sergeant so-and-so's pay has been screwed up, okay? Or there's a grandparent or parent who's sick. Now, let me know how that works out for you. So absolutely, it all rests on the shoulders of the leader, and you will prep yourself mentally, physically by subscribing to this concept of I have got to be the hardest working member on his team, and that's just the long and short of it. And so when I would show up to a unit and have my first meeting, this was my gospel that I preached. And I'd tell the team, now you know what to expect from me as your leader. And here are my expectations of you. And now that we find ourselves in each other's orbit, we need to subscribe or it's just not going to work out. And it's about the people, period.
Yeah, my squad leader, Sergeant Joseph Garrison, he was killed in action in 2011, and one of his final tasks that he had, and he used to tell me all the time, he's like, my call sign was Josie because they couldn't say Jose. You had all you had all these country boys that couldn't pronounce my name. So they call me Josie. He's like, Josie, whatever you do, get these boys home. It doesn't matter if they're
Mm,
bruised, beaten, or what.
mm,
And I kind of always felt that he didn't just mean get them physically home.
mm,
There was a lasting impact where it meant that you know that this is going to be with you forever, and you got to see that through till the end of time, until you can no
mm,
longer deal with it physically. And so this is something that I want to circle back to, because you have a unique experience for myself or Tyler. We've never been to the Pentagon. We never worked with bureaucracy. We've never worked with top tier leaders. And after when you ES'd in 2010, Tyler.
yeah.
Yeah, and on my end of active service was in
Mm,
2011,
mm,
and then I did a minor gig working for Academy, being you know as a PSS protecting diplomats in Kabul. But I've never been around that kind of bureaucracy to see and understand and get a feel for why things have stalemated in terms of just kind of progress. And this is what I mean by that. And I'm not hitting hard on leadership right now in terms of who these people are, because I have no idea who they are. But one of the solutions that we do have is what we want to do in the long term is, and this is the mission right here. In order to go ahead and begin at least healing this, or at least resolving this issue, we want to create a new MOS that's specifically designed, one, to understand mental health, be credentialed in it, understand how influence operations work, also be a rifleman, and have these individuals in all ranks and assemblies throughout the Marine Corps. And we feel that this is achievable, this is doable, and it can happen. However, there is a level of bureaucracy, there's a level
mm,
of and you described that toward the end of the book, whenever you were working at the Pentagon, that you wrote this piece up, but you had to think policy level, high level, right? And that's
yeah.
something I want to pick your mind about as we near kind of either the middle or the portion of this conversation, because I think it's important. A lot of us at the lower ranks, we don't understand how those processes work. We see typically either the good guy or the bad guy, and I'm not too sure if that's a fair assessment to make, especially when you're dealing with something intimate. And I know for me, Tyler,
Mm,
being in the infantry and doing ground operations is a very intimate thing. And as a result of the past 20 years of being in OIF and OEF, it seems to me that careerism has pervaded military service in general, and has leaked into the battle space to the point where it's undermining the entire ethical component of who we are, and just undermining the idea that these men that you're leading are less important, and what's more important to you is your career. And I
mm,
think that understanding this kind of dichotomy between the bureaucracy, the leadership, resolving, and careerism, I think that's a good component that a lot of the individuals that might listen to this might want to understand. But before tapping into that, I do want to ask that you share a little bit about yourself, because what we want to know is, we want to know who Lieutenant Colonel Harris is. You have 30 years, technically you have 60 years of experience in life, and you can articulate it well into the point. And we had this conversation not too long ago, where it's not everyone sees what goes behind the scenes. Like, it takes me, I wake up every morning at 3 a.m. to start my regimen, precognitive checks and inspections, what I'm about to face, what I'm about to do, and you know, now that I have social media platforms, people see, the happy side, the successful side, these projects, but they don't see the grind that you have to put in, the anxiety, the dread, the depression. And, not that, those kinds of things are kind of like this victimization of, the veteran, is, I think, has been demoralizing to our overall community. But I do believe that those kinds of scars, those kinds of battle wounds, need to be addressed, and just to have a humane conversation with somebody with your rank and your military experience is going to do a lot of good. And if you could just, begin sharing a little bit about your origins.
Okay. Yes. So uh, I was born and raised in West Africa, in Liberia. Um, my family immigrated to the United States in 1977. Uh, Prior to that, my dad was here in 1970, and it took him about 7 years to get our documentation through the pipeline, the immigration pipeline. And we finally arrived in February of 1977. The plane landed at JFK at 5 p.m. It was a Pan Am flight, and it was snowing. That was the first time I saw snow in my life at age 15 with my brother and my sister and mother. Uh, so we lived in New York City for several months in Harlem, and then subsequently moved to Staten Island in the summer of 1977. Experienced the New York City, the infamous New York City blackout of 1977. And as they say, the rest of it is history. That fall, so the summer was our Americanization time. My brother and I totally immersed ourselves in wanting to become Americans. Everything we could get our hands on to read, uh, listening to radio programs, participating or being involved in, and everything. And we just wanted to become Americans. Um, the fall, I went to school, went into school, junior high school, finished, and then went to high school and onto college and so on. And what I always say is, during that time, I mean, I was already a man of faith, a person of faith, but the immigration process, the shock of it all, growing up in out of the city, we lived in an area called Caldwell, outside of the city of Monrovia, and moving to New York City, that was a culture shock, to say the least. Um, so the only things I had to hold on to and use as my anchor, despite the fact my dad was a Coptic Orthodox priest, studying theology at Union Theological Seminary and getting his doctorate in divinity, in metaphysics at the time, was my faith. So at that time, at 15 years old in my life, I really became in tune to these two friends, I call them. One was Uncle Sam, is Uncle Sam, and the other was God. And including myself, we've just been a lethal threesome ever since. Everything that I've encountered or gone on to. I joined the military. I always knew that I wanted to serve because before leaving Liberia to come here, my grandfather, Pedro, called my brother and I and said, "Gentlemen, I don't know if I will ever see you again." And true to that, since we departed, we never saw him again because shortly after we left, a couple of years, a nasty civil war erupted in Liberia, and he was killed during that time. But he said, "I don't know if we'll ever see each other again. So I want to tell you all this." He said, "I don't have gold or silver to pack in a bag and give you, but here's my Bible. In it lies all of the answers to all the questions you will ever have. Take it with you." And he put it in my hand as the oldest of the two, my brother and I. And then he said, "Whatever country you find yourselves in, wherever you do settle in, the greatest honor you can give to your new home, your new country, is to serve in our military. And I'll leave that with you." So I always had that in my mind and wanting to serve. And it didn't matter to me. I would serve in any branch of the service. I'll go serve in the Coast Guard. I just wanted to serve. And I knew that. There were other factors that kind of pushed me into serving in the Army versus, the Navy. or the Air Force and Marine Corps. At the time in the mid to late 80s, leadership wise, and I knew that I always wanted to be involved eventually in policy development and writing regulations. I wanted to be involved at that early age when I joined in 1988 at age 26, 27, that I wanted to have a say in what the future military of this great nation looked like, and how it trained and how it was equipped, and all of that. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be at the senior levels, plain and simple, either NCO or officer level. So when I joined, I knew I was going in for the long haul. I wasn't joining for, well, I'm going to give it 2 years and then I'll decide if I want to re-up or not. No, I just knew I signed. I'm in the full 9 yards, unless I drop dead, whichever one of the two comes first. So that was my mindset. So that, thus began the journey. So I signed up and started in the in the National Guard on an M-Day status, and then I eventually converted to active duty full-time, continued in the National Guard, and maintaining that perspective and that experience. And I really came to appreciate and understand the role of the Guard, particularly since the director, the chief, that position got elevated to the 4-star level, giving him a seat on the Joint Staff, right? As a member of the Joint Chiefs. So in all of that, starting with the fact that this individual, in comparison with the other service chiefs, Army, Navy, Air Force, active chiefs, he still has all of those responsibilities, right? Speaking with the ultimate boss, the POTUS, and dealing with all of the combatant commanders. But in addition to that, this individual deals with more than 27 other federal agencies, all right? To include all the guys who sit in the suit and ties up on the Hill, and then the ultimate customers, the Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Johnson living in Main Street, USA. Imagine that for a job description. So to start with that level, if you had $1 million home in an area that, housed an armory, because, many of these armories are in locations that before recently were pretty much, very alienated. They were out there. And so it was not uncommon to see, very expensive homes around armories today, fenced, and, you're in your house and you're looking across at this armory, and there's a truck that's been parked in one spot for I don't know how long, and there's grass and trees growing through the bumper. You're going to, energize your legislature and say, hey, I don't know what the deal is with this armory. They need to fix that. So you would get very simple, I'm kind of oversimplifying a little bit, things of that nature going all the way up. And it would end up, my gosh, sometimes at the legislators, so the late Senator McCain's office really kept my office busy with inquiries, and typically there were very short turnaround times, and you need to provide a response. It's not, it's not just an exercise, okay? And oftentimes that response, keeping it, equal, we would do the investigation, we would identify all of the relevant stakeholders, we would get their responses, I would provide the final letter, and that letter had to be in the chief's voice, because this is a 4-star responding to senator who then needs to close out the deal and respond back to Mrs. Johnson and Main Street USA, through the estates. So it really gave me a whole other aspect, and that was real. You had to respond to that. At the same time, dealing with issues of, natural disasters, or, bringing out the National Guard to respond to emergencies of whatever kind. And if you needed to bring in active duty component, as in 9/11 and Hurricane Sandy, because of assets and other things, now you have active component Title 10 coming into the states, dealing with the National Guard Title 32. These are laws, and the lawyers, the JAG officers, and these guys very competent, and they know their work. They have to synchronize and make sure that all of these things don't violate policies, and et cetera, et cetera. So very, very interesting work, and got a lot of experience in just being present around these very smart people as they did their work. So when I left the Pentagon, I came back to New York. I worked as the director for the New York City Region Counter Drug Program. And there again, now you're interfacing with the DEA, the Homeland Security, the NYPD, all of these various agencies. And that job was providing analysts, criminal analysts, financial crimes analysts, into these agencies as they did their work. Again, very interesting work, great experience. I wouldn't trade it in for the world, and if I could, I would do it all over again. I just want to back up to the issue of the mental health, which is what we started this segment on, this portion. The human mind is just not used to dealing with some of the things that soldiers, sailors, airmen, in a theater of war encounter and see, and remains the same. There's something in the brain that short circuits. It is so different, and we call it a new normal, but it kind of puts you into this social, mental state of you trying to cope and deal with this. I'll give you an example. When we arrived in country, this was in Iraq, and we finally left Kuwait and went into FOB Spiker, Forward Operating Base Spiker, and then from there to our final area, just called Forward Operating Base Danger, and this was located in Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's homeland. So here's the thing in my mind. Well, why would you name a place Danger? And if you know it's dangerous, why the hell did you go there? But no sooner did we arrive, we started getting shelled, and said, okay, first check mark. That's why it's called Danger. But soon after we got there, there was a VBID explosion. And this thing really shook. I mean, it rattled the teeth in my head. We were on the other side of a wall built where the FOB was housed. And they were parked out in the street close to I guess the closest part of the wall they could get to, and detonated this thing. The driver was in there, and it was coming towards evening time, dusk. And when this explosion went off, there were, parts all over the place, to include body parts. Okay, and in this area where call it the hooch, where many of us slept, away from the big palace where we physically worked, we had issues to deal with, which was, find all the body parts, because, as you know, Iraq has a lot of wild dogs, and they move in packs. And that would have been an issue that night with trying to sleep and wild dogs roaming the place, trying to feast on these body parts. Excuse the very descriptive things I'm going to talk about. So as we assembled, and of course, the NCOs were in charge, and us officers got involved as well. As long as we weren't on duty, guess what? You put on your gloves and you're out there, with the troops, picking up everything. I mean, the pieces of the engine block. That's how powerful that explosion was. Pieces of the tire and parts of the car. An individual, another soldier, found the steering wheel with the occupant of the vehicle. The hands were tied to the steering wheel. And the intel guys, they connected dots later on that, oh yeah, that was the security or the insurance that he could not exit the vehicle to complete the mission in case he decided to back out or had second thoughts. So he was literally tied to the vehicle when it was detonated, and he couldn't go. That's why we found the hands still tied to the steering wheel. I definitely remember picking up portions of a jawbone with 2 or 3 teeth in it, and again, we had to get all this stuff up so that we didn't have issues of decaying body around the file, because it was just all over the place. And there were other instances of that. My whole point is, you cannot experience that sort of thing, and the smell, the burning flesh. You cannot experience that and remain the same. It's going to affect you. It's going to impact you mentally. Okay. And for the most part, I worked on a fob, and I went out of the wire when we got into the mode of transitioning and shutting down fobs and transitioning them back to the Iraqi military. But I would experience minor incidences, but it's definitely an emotional thing to deal with. The units that were out of the wire on a regular basis, patrolling and or doing logistics runs, they were attacked. They had fatalities. They had injuries. You cannot experience that and your mind ever remaining the same. I consider myself fortunate because I didn't have so many of those very close experiences. But I remember having issues when I came home, long after, years after. A good friend of mine, Phil Esposito, captain at the time, his XO, Dave Allen, were both killed in their office building on the fob. Massive explosion. And of course, they didn't survive. And I remember, I still have this conversation with Phil when I met him in the dining facility. I walked in that night and saw him sitting by himself. And I said, "Hey, Phil, what's going on, brother?" And he goes, "Hey, I'm doing fine, man." He said, and he had a smirk on his face, just kind of like a smile. And I told him, "Hey, why are you sitting by yourself? Why are you eating by yourself? Don't you have any friends?" And I remember commenting, the food tastes better if you eat with other people. And he just kind of shrugged me off and go, no, Dan, I'm good. I'm good, man. I just want to sit by myself. And so recognizing that, to respect his space, I found a group of other guys that I sat with, ate chow, and then left and came back to my space to work. And he was killed that night. That's when that explosion went off. Your mind can never be the same. When I went into that space, even before it was roped off by the MPs, for them to start the investigation and so on, the blood was just splattered all against the wall, all into the ceiling. And from what I learned later on, it was a claymore mine placed on a windowsill. Give you a picture of this building in Saddam's palace in Tikrit. there was a building built over this pond with bridges on both sides, and the bridge kind of acted as the anchor that held the building up over the pond. So there was no way to get to this building without walking across this, this bridge to get to the building. It was in the middle. So this, however, this thing was rigged, the individual that set it up, and I'm in my enlisted side, I was a 12 Bravo combat engineer. I know how to set up Claymore mines. I know how to work with C4 and other things. Individual who knew what they were doing to set up a Claymore mine used either dead cord or a timing fuse. Don't know which one it was, because if it was timing fuse, they would have to time the distance and amount of feet and how long it's to burn and whether or not he was there or not. And if it was dead cord, well, they had to run that somehow, and someone had to be watching in order to prime the blasting cap to set this thing off. Nevertheless, to see a close friend of mine, his blood and stuff all over the walls like that, your mind can never be the same. This was back in 2005. This is 2021. I'm talking to you, and it feels like yesterday.
Yeah.
And when I came home, my wife used to wake me up out of sleep because she said, I'd be shaking and reaching and grabbing. And she says, I can't lay with you in the bed when you're like this. Now that's a little better, but that became my new normal. As many other soldiers, they developed new normals of their own and came back home to their families. And many who couldn't, resolve that in some way, shape, or form, ultimately committed suicide because of that pain in the brain. So the comment to consider an MOS that is mental health focused, and how you introduce that into the process to get it, of course, discussed, analyzed. You develop the curriculum. It needs to go through the approval process, right? And for all intents and purposes, it's got to be the medical side of things. But I think it's one that is so widespread and it affects such a large number of our members that your ops, your intel, your loggies, your maintenance, everyone has to have some input into that, has to have a consideration in it, at least at senior levels. This is my experience. I'll share this with you. I found a huge disconnect between the very senior levels of my organization, the Army. I can speak for the Army, staying in my lane. I can't talk to Navy. I can't talk to the Marine Corps or the Coast Guard in my lane. I found a serious disconnect between the senior levels, those mid levels between them and the rest of us. So I'm talking senior 06s, full bird colonels, senior 05s, and then the rest. And that disconnect is one of very being in tune with the human side of soldiering. I'll give you an example. My CG, when we landed at Fob Danger, we're going through our first BOB, the battle update briefs. And the fatality reports started to come in. I was sitting from where I could observe the boss, the CG. And what I observed raised the hair on my skin. Tears came down his eyes as the various sections, ops and wherever was reporting this IED encounter and the names. Of course, these are these briefs are closed. You need to be cleared, to come in there. But he internalized that. He felt that pain, and I could see him making notes, and I could see him, you know, rolling this through his mind. That's a family's life that's now been impacted by the death of those soldiers. Okay, and how those lives are going to change forever. But it really put me in a different space, and I felt blessed to have a boss like that. Okay, who for him that that moment was not trivialized with the usual, and you would know what I'm talking about. Well, we suck it up. This is what we're trying to do, and this is what we're here. You know what? There is a time for that, but the fact that that experience brought the human side of him out, let me know that, okay, if I get hurt or I get killed, it's not going to be trivialized. It will not be marginalized. Forget what you hear, in the briefings. These things brief very well. The 6 o'clock news, some senior officers standing there about, how we take all this important and suicide rates. And, I can say this for many, not all, and I'll qualify that. These guys, it's a briefing bullet. It looks great on PowerPoint and it sounds good on the 6 o'clock news. But where the tire hits the road, okay, I've seen few shed a tear, but just take a moment to take a deep breath to recognize what just happened. I have soldiers dead and others, critically injured, still to determine what that outcome is going to be. And in their minds, I'm sure that becomes a new normal. That was a new normal for my CG. That was a new normal for my commanding general. Okay. And same with coming and working at Guard Bureau and then working at the Pentagon. And, I had the opportunity to sit in the briefs, and at that level, you're the guy planted against the wall where, you're not even seen, right? You're standing there with your pad and you're making notes. And when it's your time to brief, they look at you and you say what you have to say in the shortest time possible and move on to the next person. Okay. But I did see at that level, these senior guys were very much in tune to what's happening on the ground with Joe. On the log side, I remember this conversation about, the original pack mule, which is the infantryman. Okay. The general says, my God, how much more shit are we going to give these kids to carry? So now we're talking with all of the new equipment that we have to carry and all the batteries that have to accompany them. There's, as a logger, you throw up this slide with this huge ruck and this little infantryman with this big pack. You got them carrying all this crap. We need to get to the policy of when you invent something that you want to sell to DOD for the infantryman to use, okay, it needs to either replace something that he's already got, or you got to find a way to have it powered other than you now have to carry 20, D-size batteries packed in a backpack along with everything else. But I mean, we laughed about it, but it was a consideration that you can't keep inventing crap for these guys to be issued and it gets packed into the one pack. Because at the end of the day, there's one guy on 2 feet toting that stuff, on sandy terrain, on rocky terrain, in swampy terrain, and so on and so forth. So there's definitely, I found a recognition and an acknowledgement of what was happening down at the troop level. And I found this disconnect with those guys in the middle. And I really applaud you and Tyler for thinking through that this issue of, social disorder and the mental part of what soldiers, service members, I'd say, deal with, to elevate that to the point where it becomes an MOS and to have that specialty on the ground. They need to be on the ground. So my son's in the Pennsylvania Army National Guard, and when he deployed, they had an incident. He's a 19 kilo, so tank track operator, both for the Strykers and the M1s, and he's very good at it. When they redeployed, he was given an award for safety and safe driving. To which I told the general, I said, "Sir, I need to get that award." He was, "What are you talking about, Colonel Harris?" I said, "Well, I taught him how to drive. It wasn't the Army." And we had a laugh about that. But he explained a situation where they were on a patrol and the lead vehicle encountered an IED. And so the column stopped, infantry, disembark, small arms fire. We know the routine over and over. He's explaining it to me. And they're trying to get to their team members in the lead vehicle of a Bradley that had been flipped on its side and was on fire. And now those guys in there were being suppressed with small arms fire coming at them. And the rest of them are trying to get to them. It was just a crazy scene. So eventually this whole thing gets cleared and they're back. They take them off, we call it taking them offline. And they're trying to get them to talk about it. And so he's explained it to the captain, and he's explaining it to, I guess, the command sergeant major, and then the medical guys, and explaining. So at some point he was on the phone with me and he said, "Dad, every time we have to keep explaining this, it's reliving that experience over and over." And he was getting annoyed. He says, "This is irritating the shit out of me, and I'm getting pissed. Why does it have to be so repetitive?" So two things: those individuals, CSM, company commander, whoever else, medical, all of these folks thought they were doing the right thing, and really what they needed, okay, after they've submitted their debriefs and their report, is a mental worker, okay, who would know what types of questions to ask, and first of all, how to set up the environment, okay, that they could sit in and have this conversation, and knowing how to have that conversation. It's the same equivalent to a 911 call, the police responding to an incident where that they encounter is having, a serious mental breakdown. The police are trained, right, to go into kinetic mode. That's what they do. When they show up, they're in the kinetic mode, right? And so everything that they experience, they're going to translate it into how they need to react. Well, a social worker or mental, a worker would know how to approach that type of individual differently from a police officer shows up with guns drawn and all that stuff. So in many respects, it's we collectively, the system, not providing the right set of tools and individuals or expertise at the space and time when it's needed. And again, I bring that to leadership. It's a leadership issue. I don't excuse them for it not being there. They should have thought about it. They should have thought about it. We go through the MDMP process, the Army side military decision-making process, where we examine the hair on a gnat's ass on every particular issue. We develop the plans, we war game the plans, and we do several iterations on turns back and forth with all of the domains and all of the classes of supplies and any issue. How do you miss this? And this is what I mean when I say, when you as a leader find yourself standing at the edge of the world and it's going to hell in a handbasket, and your assistant or your executives, whoever you have in your team, stands there and go, "Gee, boss, we have a problem." Well, no shit, Sherlock. I can see that. Okay, where the hell were you 30 days ago, 60 days ago, 6 months ago? Okay, where were you to be able to have done the analysis and present to me, "Hey, boss, this is the situation. When we hit this grid coordinate, this is what we're going to encounter. Oh, by the way, I've developed 3 courses of action on which you need to make a decision. And oh, by the way, this is my recommended course of action. So you got the other 2, but this is the one that I recommend." Okay. That now involves staff doing good staff work, leader. The purpose of leadership is to make decisions. Okay. Very simply. When I need a decision made and you're the boss and you can't give me a decision, I don't need you. Okay. So another issue where, because they're worried about their hindquarters or their reputation or their careers, these guys, they don't want to make decisions. Well, I need more information, sir. Flash to bang time is now. Okay. You don't have time. You got to give me a decision. Okay. Which way do I go? Do I go left or right? There's a fork in the road. Do we go left or right? Okay. I mean, and I know this firsthand because going through the academy, we were told, you make a decision when you get to that point. Okay. It's not okay to stand there with ambivalent feelings. I need to, I don't know, or you throw your arms up, give the polar bear salute. You better damn well make a decision. We will discuss the merits of those decisions later on. Okay. But you better make a decision, because many times if you follow your gut instinct, it's oftentimes the right one, and you're going to save lives, or you're going to mitigate, the damage to equipment and people's lives. But understand, you are hesitant to make a decision because perhaps your original thinking and your input into this thing has been disingenuine, has been nefarious. You have not really brought yourself to the game. Okay, so I am one who puts everything squarely back on the shoulders of leaders. Okay, I put it on. We should have thought about this by now. When we initially went into OIF with the soft skin vehicles, okay, and Marines and soldiers were getting shot up in with plastic doors Humvees. Okay, it's unbelievable to me that people, leadership, planners, thinkers, did not understand that we need to have better protection. Okay, and to the point where I remember soldiers and saw the news where they were going into the dumpsters for sheets and plates of metal from the maintenance sections to put in the doors, even on the floors of the vehicles, to protect themselves from small arms fire. Now, granted, when the news started finally coming back, and soldiers calling home and hey, buy me body armor and send it in the mail, okay, and the news started hitting the leadership. I give them the fact that they did a quick turnaround time in starting to get up armored systems into theater right away. But imagine how many perished because that foresight was not there. That, hey, we need to think about this. I'm sorry, you raised your right hand to become the boss, and you have to be the hardest working member on the team. That means you need to be thinking first. You need to see first. You need to hear first. And if you're not going to do those things, then you're the wrong person. We need to pull you out and plug in the next individual. I I place everything squarely on the shoulders of leadership, and that's both at the NCO level and the officers. Just if you're going to hold up that mantle to be the boss, you better darn well be prepared to be the boss, because what it involves is being the hardest working member on the team, and your number one priority is the safety of your personnel, because without them, nothing's going to happen, and that's both their physical and mental state. Soldiers don't have problems with dying and getting hurt. They really don't. Marines don't have problems with that. They knew that long before they signed, and to wear the uniform and go into harm's way. We've reconciled that in our minds. Okay, but to go in ill prepared in terms of the right equipment, not necessarily the training, but additional, adequate, effective equipment. That's on leadership. That's on leadership.
There's something I
And
want to
yes,
something I want to bring, not to cut you off, sir.
mhm,
I just want to say I appreciate how transparent you are about a lot of things you're discussing, and I think a lot of things me and Josie talk about are things that we've worked through personally,
mhm,
on a personal level and getting us to where we are today. Um, but one of the huge disconnects for us, I think, are we were taught the whole lead from the front mentality. Do
mhm,
it first, be the first one to do it, and
yep,
you will find leaders that way as well. The ones
mhm,
that are willing to follow you and willing to listen to what you say and respect what you do because they see you doing it. But being detached from that, for a decade now almost,
mhm.
it's difficult to lead remotely, where
Absolutely.
you're not around your guys, you're not around your fire team, your squad members, where you can have that bond that Jose could touch into
An
the
awareness. It's
yeah,
an
the
awareness.
awareness, the connection you have in your bubble with your guys, and you know something we've talked about, individually together, and on, one of the previous podcasts was just about how, not having that preparedness mentally going into it. Luckily we discussed some things that I did prior to, being experienced to that, to combat on that level and traumas on that level. I kind of partially prepared my brain for what that was, but I don't remember ever that being part of our training, our workups. Combat's been going on for a very long time, and
Absolutely.
you know, not until recently, probably within the past, you know, um, 15, 15, maybe 20 years, have we started to acknowledge what what type of combat trauma, the effects that has on individuals, partaking in that. And, guys, World War II, Vietnam era, they experienced a lot of the same things. And it wasn't
Absolutely.
until, like Jose has discussed about, the thing about suicide and everything, is that it has this effect that once when it's discussed, that it spreads.
Mhm.
And PTSD kind of seems similar in that way, because a lot of Vietnam guys, World War II guys, which most of those them are gone now, they dealt with that and they lived with it, but it wasn't discussed on the level that it is now. And
And
I
thankfully,
think
thankfully. Mhm.
absolutely right. But now I think more importantly than ever, with heavy the conflicts kind of dying down as far as kinetic involvement goes, doesn't mean it's not going to happen again. It will happen again at some point in the future, and I think that is why it's more important than ever to have something in place, because these things haven't changed. They've been the same, whether guys have discussed them at this level or not before in the past. You know, something needs to be put in place as far as training goes. It says, look, you're gonna, it doesn't mean you don't need to be gung ho and a gunslinger and wanting to get out there and bang next to your guys. But look, these things are gonna happen to you. You're going to experience these things, and this is how we deal with them. We've
Right.
had to take this decade journey individually to figure out
Yes.
what works for us, and um, you know, I think compiling those with individuals like yourself at that high of leadership level that know what's worked for you and know the things you've experienced, and just kind of get this group of individuals to compile these techniques to um kind of maintain that drive and
Yeah.
that passion about life, that's where what really we're after. um
Yes. And two things, Tyler. Um, so there is the acknowledgement now that you talked about earlier, and thankfully we can talk about it openly. There's not a stigma uh, associated with it any longer.
right.
But I'm afraid that that is limited. Okay, it's limited. Uh, the briefings, and you'll hear it on the 6 o'clock news. We encourage uh, soldiers to take a knee, uh, come offline when you've encountered these situations, et cetera, et cetera. But I know it's still a detriment to your next promotion or your next schooling. So the thinking and the discussion has not caught up yet with what reality is on the ground. Okay. I know of individuals who refused to go seek help because they knew that the minute they said, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, or I need emotional support, okay, from a professional, uh, they were going to be stigmatized. They would be pulled offline. They would not be able to. Uh, they would no longer be able to do their work. Their clearances would be, subject to being questioned. So they were not going to let that come out. That I'm experiencing some mental trauma that I think I need help with. You know, hey, sir, I'll deal with it, and I'll okay. Um, and I had to do what I had to do as a senior officer to get those individuals help. But when I sat alone, the thinking that went through my mind was, now why is Sergeant X refusing to go seek, you know, help? Because he had experienced what happened to his buddy before him. Okay, I'm not walking down that road. That individual, that guy's been screwed now for life. He'll never be able to go out and do his work. So they still keep this inside and they battle with it. So we still need to cross that path again. Reason why, and these I experienced a couple, several more. I'm sure there are hundreds and thousands out there in the formations. Reason why a perhaps an MOS or individual who is resident amongst uh, these people can pick up on these signs and symptoms and know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
Another key reason: many will not come up and say, "I need help." I was one of them. I would not go up and say, I brought it home and was shaking and fighting myself in sleep. Eventually, it's kind of going away, but I don't know that it actually ever goes away. So that's real. The and there was a second component that I needed to address there. This is widespread. It's not only with our service members, right? This is with non-service members as well. Police officers undergo PTSD. Firemen and women undergo PTSD. When the 9/11 attacks, many of us who were in New York at the time uh, dealt with that, and I'm talking your ordinary civilian. And that is whenever the mind encounters that which is not normal, it short circuits, it does something in the brain that changes who you are. And that becomes your new normal. So there's really a huge need and a requirement for what you and Jose are talking about at all levels. We're talking about that now with police officers responding with mental health workers in that team, right? And this is in a civilian capacity. Same thing with the firemen. I mean, you show up to put out a fire, you go in to inspect, and there's the charred remains of a body.
Yeah.
One, now you're dealing with that because you missed it or couldn't get to that person in time. I guarantee you that fireman will never be the same.
Right.
It plays on your mind. Okay. The same with, you're walking, you're on lunch. There's an explosion, and you see a person running with an arm missing or their guts hanging out. You're not going to be the same. You need professional help. So there's just a tremendous need, I think, in our society to really elevate this discussion to the next level. And it is not far-fetched that very senior levels of the Pentagon, we need to stop talking about, we're budgeting this amount of money to address this with social workers and so on and so forth. I think we need to peel that onion back several layers now and really get down into the hair and the gnat's ass details with, we need to train people. They need to become immersed in these units. We have chaplains, but that's not what a chaplain is for. A chaplain is for you to come and talk about, your social, whether it's family or financial issues with. But yeah, there's a tremendous need. There's a tremendous need. We're talking about service members because of our shared experiences. But it's out there.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing that differentiates us from animals is our forebrain, the part of the brain that is responsible for compassion, empathy, and all those other types of emotions that we have that are different from animals. Animals experience trauma every day. It's part of their survival, but yet when we are asked, or civilians that are experienced to trauma at that level, at the level of that animals deal with on a daily basis, you're expected to still carry yourself as a whole individual. And I think once you do encounter those, part of that becomes damaged, or like you said, rewired. And we don't know what the answer is to it. There hasn't been enough things implemented, I think, to try that's kind of a weird thing. You're asking someone to be an animal almost, especially in combat scenario, or civilian, and experience those very traumatic things, but then still carry yourself on a day-to-day basis as a whole human being. And that's just
It's challenging.
Yeah,
it's very challenging. And as a leader, kind of connecting the dots to what we've been speaking about, I struggle to bridge the gap and make the connections between leadership. Even though I rest it squarely on their shoulders, what is it I'm asking of leadership to address hyperreality in the domain of, and I'm going to the extreme, in the domain of artificial intelligence, semi and autonomous AI. How does leadership work? What does leadership do in this context of hyperreality, and now having to deal with the results of decisions from something that's a machine, the result of whatever a machine makes. So that's it's not far-fetched. We're in it now. We are in it now. Some of the things I think that would help are defining, or at least helping leadership to define what it is we want them to do. And I think you did it very clearly. Guys, it's one COA, it's one course of action. Okay. Develop an MOS that addresses mental disorders. Okay. And those individuals still need to be soldiers. We're all soldiers. We all learn how to shoot, move, and communicate. Okay. Once you get past those 4 months, then we specialize in our various specialties, right? So they would still need to know how to shoot, move, and communicate. Okay, under fire and not. And then they can specialize into, okay, I'm in a team. What are the signs and the symptoms, and how do you read what's going on with the members of that team, so that you can advise that commander or that lieutenant at the ground level, that platoon sergeant or that squad leader, hey, this is what I observe. I think we need to take these actions, and so on and so forth, and start getting immediate help. They're needed at that ground level. And we know that it can be done because we've done that with intelligence. Intel used to be the purview of hire. Okay. And one day, I'm kind of simplifying it, but a genius got the idea that, wait a minute, the guys that need intel is that company and platoon sergeant who are on the ground, way up front in contact.
Yeah.
Why are you sitting up here with all of this intelligence? And that's the guy that needs it.
Yeah.
And he's got to go through all this process to get it. Cut out all the middle people. As it's being developed and analyzed, right? That company commander up front, okay, down to that squad leader, has access to that intel. And now they can make decisions on things immediately on the ground. We've done it with intel. So clearly, we can do it with this concept of what we're talking about here, with a mental health expert within the ranks. I know the first thing folks are going to throw their arms up. Well, it's going to be too expensive.
Oh yeah.
Well, what is the cost? What is the cost of the life of one soldier? We spend $7 to $8 million on one tank. We spend, I don't know, $6 to $8 million on a helicopter. What's the cost of a soldier's life? Right?
Yeah.
But these are the fights that you guys need to begin to anticipate, so that you can develop the responses, to those questions and those comments as they come up, because they will. There are those who will become allies because they lock onto it immediately. Yep, we got this. We understand exactly where you're coming from. And then you're going to have to fight through, the budget hawks and the cost, et cetera, and so on and so on and so forth. But very, very much needed. And here's the other thing. There is something called critical time and place in leadership. Okay. And that's the reason why my consulting firm is named Muddy Boots Leadership, LLC. And that's because you cannot lead from behind your desk. You cannot lead by being in your office. Okay. You need to push that chair back, get up, and walk around. You need to be amongst your team. Okay. And in so doing, you're going to get your boots dirty. You have to. But that's when you're going to conduct effective leadership. And by doing so, walking around, you will know, you'll identify what I'm calling the critical time and place. And that is that place and that time where you, as the leader, need to find and place yourself there. Because if you don't, okay, your mission, your objective, your directive is not happening. You act as a catalyst in a reaction to drive that reaction into the direction that you want it to go by placing yourself in that critical time and place. So identifying this subject matter expert in that team, again, is addressing exactly that. We've identified a critical time and place, and we need to have the right person there to act as a catalyst to make this reaction successful, or else it's just not going to happen. So critical time and place, the leadership, their relation to hyper reality, the mental issues that result from the actions or the environment of what's going on around. Um, yeah, all of those things are very real and can really be addressed by, this one SME that we're talking about in an MOS related case. And the person doesn't have to have a PhD or doctorate behind their name, but they need to at least be able to triage an individual right there on the spot, and
Yeah.
then move them up to the next level, just like our combat medics. Okay, it may very well be that that becomes another one of those areas where perhaps combat medics become trained in to address the issue right now. Okay, while we continue to refine and think through the processes of bringing that person in, because what do we have that's already on ground and already have access to the individuals? Well, every organization at every level has us combat medics, and I tell you, those are some of the most able-bodied, very enthusiastic people I've run into. I mean, medics are, God bless them. They will jump in there and do whatever they need to do to assist a service member in need. I mean, very proactive and forceful about it. It's impressive to watch them, work. I know because they've done it with me. And I'm trying to push them away, and they're like, "No, sir, no, you need, listen to me. I know you're Lieutenant Colonel, but you need to do this," and they don't back down. And when I extricate myself and I'm sitting back, I said, you know what, I needed that. So perhaps those are the first line, people that we start with, because I'll tell you this: when you are floating an idea, okay, to leadership, you have to have done the work and all the staff work, because leadership is lazy. And by that, I mean, when you're bringing in something new for them to consider, and they have to start making the sausage, in their minds, it ain't happening. They'll tell you no, right up front. And the no is because you're asking them to do work in that regard. Okay. Think about it this way: you're the leader. The only thing I need from you is to make a damn decision. But in order for you to make a decision, the onus is on me to make the sausage. Okay. And do all of the groundwork so that when I present it to you, you're going to take a look at it. You're either going to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or do very minimal work, or ask me a few questions. But if I just brought the whole thing and drop it on you, that's a surefire way of failure. And I used to tell my staff that, guys, resist the urge to bring your problems and drop it on my shoulder. I will react violently to you. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do your homework. Okay, make the sausage. And sausage making is dirty business. Okay? I don't know if sausage making is dirty. It's very dirty business. Right?
Yeah.
But bring me a sausage when you've made it, and all I need to do is taste it and give you the north-south. Okay, but if you're going to bring me all the ingredients and I got to get into the meat and start asking, it's not happening. I'm going to be very violent with you.
That's one of the. Oh, sorry about that, sir. I was just going to say that's one of the goals. In publishing this book is laying down the groundwork for the next movement, and this is a lifelong mission. I understand there's going to be obstacles, but I also understand how to get across my point at higher levels, which I do believe that laying down the groundwork, this next year for this next piece is going to be beneficial. And, that's why, and I didn't say, to recap it from the beginning, that why I believe, why I made the claim that social epigenetic and mimetic entropy was an issue is that's a matter of national security. We're talking about the economic template of the United States of America, and we're already seeing the effects of it. And I know that we've discussed this with General Gronsky prior in our podcast, and just knowing and having been in a leadership position, being a small unit leader, being a squad leader, being a fire team leader, and understanding the kinds of rigors that you as a leader, but you also with your guys have to go through. It takes quite a bit, and increasingly, and so I did 3 combat tours, and by the third tour, we had a pool of new guys, and not all of them were up to par. And I, slipping through the cracks was one of the common phrase, "What's going on here?" And we were lucky enough to get the Battalions not to deploy. And as you might have read, between 2019 and 2020, the Pentagon releasing reports about, the state of young adults in the United States. There's roughly 60% of young adults that are too obese, have low IQs, that can't even serve in a capacity of military service. And while military service may be a little bit averse to the overall society, well, what about education, and what about the workforce? What chance do they have? And so what this does is their state of mind, in conjunction to narratives that have been weaponized, atmospheres are created. And one of the things that I discuss, and one of the things discussing hyperreality and multi-domain leadership and clip and all, is that there's a academic, her name is Susan Blackmore, and she wrote a book called The Meme Machine. And
Say that again.
The Meme Machine.
Okay.
And it's an older book, but moving forward, she began to write about a third replicator, which is called teams, technological memes. And these are the semi-autonomous artificial intelligences that are now influencing and generating atmospheres between objects in space. And I do work with children, and I see this all the time. When you look at the ACEs score, the adverse childhood effects, right? It's scaled from 1 to 10, and the more you have, the more likely these individuals are going to be one to have some kind of mental health challenge, are going to have some kind of behavioral challenge, or going to be involved in some kind of deviant behavior. Well, the problem is that those kinds of formats don't look into how other factors like AI, semi-autonomous AI, or teams are generating atmospheres which are then predisposing and engineering these kids to think and be a certain way, or to develop artificial traumas.
Yeah.
And the fear that I have is that at some point we're going to reach an inflection point where the recruiting quotas, the ability to have some kind of cohesive dimension between government and society, is going to be in really big trouble. And the past year has really shown us how the whole of government, whole of society issues are very much detached and very not on par with what's taking place, on the ground, and how these things are being manipulated, how people are being manipulated. And the case study that I do most of the time, that I discuss to the public, is what the Internet Research Agency did between 2013 and 2016 with the election. And the IRA, it was 1,000 Russian sock puppets, people with false identities online. And what they did was they set up shop, within the ecosystem. They created entire groups. They, sowed division. They pitted people against people, and they influenced 150 million people. And not only did they do that online, they committed to classical espionage acts. They brought in people from Russia to go and do the human asset development. And this is, these are the kinds of things that are taking place within our society. And it only takes one event, one psychological operation to manifest itself. And we have, and what David Chauvin did to George Floyd that's a problem. Like, there's no words for that. But that kind of event, and it was exploited, did decades worth of damage.
Yes.
And so now you have an entire generation that has this idea that specific individuals are now pathogenic, right? They've taken on this atmosphere, or this identity, that these specific people are bad. And if you have every institution, and that's the other part, is that warfare has evolved. We're now competing in gray zone activity, right? Um, David Kilcullen, professor, writes about liminal warfare and how Russia did its act with Crimea and how it bombarded the ecosystem, and it, did plausible deniability while bombing Syria and causing massive refugees to enter. And it's just a constant. And what people don't realize is that on some level, there are foreign actors that are participating in this. And our epistemic democracy, which is built upon AI, is also a perpetrator in this new era of information and influence. And I don't have I'm optimistic in my own endeavors because I'm young and have the ability I have drive. I have a lot of drive and I don't quit. But I do recognize that there are some realities they may not be changed. But one of the things that we can do is mitigate, 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 mitigate. And
Exactly.
so it's about, and I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna bark as loud as I can to like get the attention in order to complete the mission at hand.
Well, you've started in the right place, Jose, because writing the book, think about it, okay, and publishing, just by undergoing that process qualifies you, okay? The book, being an author, okay, uh, you are authority on this. You become an authority. That's what an author is on that particular topic that you've written about. The equal sign, on the other side of the equal sign, is credibility. With whom? The senior leaders you are barking at, you're talking to consider exactly what we're talking about, right? So make no mistake, you're on the right path. You're on the right azimuth, Maureen. I'll tell you, you are heading in the right direction. Ensure that you publish the book, because that gives you the credibility so that when you're barking and someone says, well, who the hell is Jose Herrera? Oh, Mr. Herrera is a published author on this issue of mental disorder and PTSD, and these are his recommendations. This is what he is. Okay. You then created that space. The reason why I can easily see that is because I took the same steps, and reason for publishing my book on leadership. Okay. I go to speak about leadership. Well, who the hell is Dan Harrison? Why should I listen to him? People have their time, right? Oh, well, he's a professor. He teaches graduate school leadership at Mercy College. Oh, by the way, he's retired after 30 plus years in the military. He's had command time, and he's also served on senior level staff. And he just published his book on all of it on leadership. So what that does is it creates that credibility space, and it answers that very first question to an audience when they ask, who the hell is Jose Herrera and why should we listen to him? Okay. So I'm giving you the thumbs up, and I'm assuring you from a colonel's perch point that you are heading the right direction. Keep going. So the other piece that you talked about, and this is the next thing that'll get their attention, is your ability to tie it to the bottom line. And what's the bottom line? Money, cost. What is the cost to society? What are the second and third order costs that we're not even considering? We have not monetized it. We've not attached numbers to. There are second and third and fourth order effects to ignoring this problem, to marginalizing this problem, and to just thinking it's not important. So the book, the tying to the bottom line, and I mean across all sectors, right? The entire population. What is the cost of, you know, PTSD among returning service members, retired service members, and then the general population who deals with these effects that are just not normal, causes the brain to short circuit? There are monetary costs. And when you start associating numbers to that, I'll tell you whose attention you're going to get right away. It's those guys in black suits up on the hill.
Yep.
Okay? Because for them, it's all about the numbers. When you look, it's all about the numbers. Okay? And think about it. Senior level headquarters like DOD. What is its purpose? Policy, money. That's it. They generate policy that governs the whole, and they dish out the bucks. So your research, you're having this conversation through a series of podcasts, all of the books you're referencing and reading, and the different authors and sources of authority that you're going to incorporate, that says Jose Herrera has credibility on this topic. And oh my God, now he's talking about the economic aspects of this. And then he's looking at the future aspects of this and how it's impacting the population, the youth, and moving forward. And then, oh, by the way, here are some of the other small second and third order effects. Okay. Our organization, the military, is becoming more and more highly mechanized, automated. And who do you need to operate? You need operators. Well, you can't get operators if these kids are not finishing school. I'll tell you a problem. This is really, in fact, this is a good example. As a battalion commander in my signal organization, okay, I had to sit with the recruiters and tell them, guys, I need you to conduct surgical recruiting for individuals who can go to signal school, can qualify, first of all, for the SVAB, and go to signal school and graduate. Now, understand what that involves. They got to be able to have security clearances, which means somewhere in their past, and these are young kids, right? They didn't do anything dumb to have gotten themselves arrested and created some kind of a police record. That's just for starters. Okay. Mm-hmm. So here are some of the challenges. The kids who were very smart and hit the ASVAB scores that they needed, very high scores, by the way, they all had issues in the past. Smoked pot, did something stupid when they were younger, you know, a couple of years, maybe in high school, just before they graduated or whatever the deal is, and they have a police record. So, now we can't get them a top secret clearance. Jeez. And the ones that were clean, well, we couldn't get them to get high enough ASVAB scores. So, totally related to what you're talking about. And these are the early signs of we now beginning to experience this. And this is just in the lane of signal. Let's start talking about all this other high-tech, more high-tech stuff that's being fielded and coming down. Who the hell's going to operate these things? Well, we can't even get these kids to finish school so that they're qualified enough to go get certified to do this work. That's a challenge. It's something we need to speak to. Again, when leadership is standing at the edge of the world and it's going to hell in a handbasket and they go, oh shit, we got a problem. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Why didn't you see this 30, 60, 90 days, 180 days ago, a year ago? Okay, that's when we should have known that we're having this issue. And unfortunately, we're having the issues now, and it's happening in space, and no one is connecting the dots, except Jose and Tyler are talking about this stuff now, attempting to start connecting these dots so that leadership can say, oh, okay, we think we have something here. So, any of the tools that you are going to leverage and any of the objectives that you're going to accomplish will only help you to be able to be listened to so that an audience will pay attention, because you are bringing credibility, having, subjected yourself to that rigor of the research, and the analysis, and developing, a thesis, and thinking about the antithesis, and synthesizing those two and coming up with making a statement. There's rigor involved in all of that, academic rigor that's involved. Unfortunately, not very many people are willing to put themselves through that. So, the burden falls on your shoulders, my friend. You're doing it.
Yeah.
You're doing it.
He's the one.
No,
I mean,
no.
he is the one. I know you. I mean, I know him, and he is the one. And sir, again, I just appreciate you being so level with us. About your experiences, and you got a amazing story, life story, and your experiences are invaluable, and sharing
Thank you.
that with us is a privilege. Um, you know, um, there
Yeah,
there
thanks
are
very much.
there are issues, and sometimes allowing them to just be an afterthought isn't fair to the ones that are going to follow in our footsteps.
There's
And
a statement that I make about educating the children well. Okay. We don't have a choice. We have to be selfish about this. Okay. We don't have a choice. You can't be selective, because at the end of the day, these people, okay, are going to grow up to judge, praise, or condemn everything that we hold to be dear. Think about it. They're going to run our institutions. They're going to grow up to run our governments. They're going to grow up and run our banks, to grow up and run, our churches, our educational institutions, on and on and on. We hold these things to be very dear based on how well we educate them. They're going to step into those places and will judge, praise, or condemn everything that we hold dear. That's what reality is. And they'll end up creating their own. We talk about the youth, and I say, I'm selfish about it. These young people are going to grow up. They're going to be congressmen and senators. They're going to be writing laws that's going to govern my Social Security. Do you think I want to pay? You think I'm interested in knowing how a youth thinks, or what he or she wants to do? Okay, I'm being selfish. I don't want them writing laws that says, well, all 65 years and older from this day henceforth, Social Security is cut off. Okay? Or they're going to pass laws after 6 o'clock, no 7-year-olds. If you're 17-year-old and above, you can't drive a car or be out in the street. You need to be at home. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but this, I'm framing the importance of this whole issue of, we don't have a choice. We need to educate our young and do so well. Because our adversaries, believe me, they're working very hard, and they're right on our heels to catching up, and they are relentless. Okay, we're the big dogs in the playing field, and we have a big target on us, and everybody's, hey, that's the objective. U.S. big target, China, North Korea, Iran. They're all shooting for that big dog, Russia. So we don't have a choice. We have to stop piddling around and doing some of the nonsense stuff that we're doing, because we've totally shut down, closed off our periphery to the bigger picture that's out there. Okay, our adversaries are getting to be just as good as we are, and so in a room of all equals, what distinguishes you from the other guy or gal? Okay, if you want to maintain the edge, you better have a distinguishable feature. Otherwise, you're just like one of them, right? So, as we think about warfare and fighting and all that, we started looking at multi-domain warfare and how leaders will function in that space, and fighting in the domains of air, sea, land, cyber, and so on and so forth. And we're talking high level stuff, and we can't get kids to pass the damn ASVAB to go to signal school. So,
I did want to end on a note, and I want to thank you. I want to thank you for writing the first chapter about 9/11, because I believe that that's a reference point for a lot of Americans.
yes.
And when I was reading about Captain Dan McNally and the buildings, I believe the buildings were coming down. There was a portion there where it said, they held on tightly to one another. A friend of mine who's a professor at UNCW, the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, put me onto a Medium article that comes out every 9/11, and it was written by a guy named Brian Doyle, and he writes about how there was individuals who ended up leaping from the buildings they knew that was in, but there is something poignant and what I cherish about it and what I think about it in terms of everything taking place today. But Brian Doyle writes, Jennifer Brickhouse saw them holding hands, and Stuart DeHaan saw them holding hands, and I hold on to that. And that was in reference to the individuals leaping off that building. And know that there's a lot of things taking place today, but reading that chapter brought me back to the reality that, one, we have to remember those historical markers. We have to remember the lessons that we learned from those, regardless of what those individuals, what they represent now, or what we might think they represent. They did something for this country.
Absolutely, and that's why I did not hesitate about capturing that. There's a reason why I used that to frame the entire book. Okay, you can't, um, you can't throw out the baby with the wash water, to use an old vernacular. Okay, if you have bad police officers who act wrongly, you have bad doctors who act wrongly, or bad judges or politicians or lawyers. That's exactly what that is. These are bad individuals in those professions. You don't stigmatize and throw out the entire force with the wash water. You take out the bad guys and you work, with the rest and move on from there. In another discussion, I offered this. Within each of the professions, the military included, who is responsible? Who sees first, knows first, hears first what's going on within your formations? Those members. Okay. The American Medical Association, okay, through a series of publications and conferences and seminars and all the things that certifications and all the things that they do, what are they attempting to do there? That is to establish, maintain, sustain a standard, and to ensure that all members within that profession achieve that standard. Same thing with the police force. Same thing with politics. Same thing with law. Okay, the individuals in that organization are responsible for policing themselves. That's what I'm driving at. They're the only ones qualified to police themselves. So that officer in the Floyd case, do you think that was the first time that that the officer on Floyd behaved that way? No. Because during that process, watch the other officers who were standing around. They weren't moved. They weren't surprised. They weren't shocked. They just stood there. If they were, they would have put a stop to it. And if you listen, the civilians were the ones who were having a reaction to what they were seeing. But let's rewind that for a second. Had those other officers stood their ground, taken the leadership position of saying, hey, man, we saw what you did the very first time an occurrence took place, right? Don't do that again. This is against the rules. We don't behave this way. Or when they return, they report it to the desk sergeant, and they let the lieutenant know, and they let the captain know to pull out this individual, either provide him more training or do whatever they need to do to set him on a correct course. You wouldn't have had that situation. And the same thing with doctors. Doctors are responsible to police up their profession. Us in the military, okay, the issue of sexual harassment as a commander, that kept me awake at nights. And I remember saying once that if we don't police up ourselves, one of these days, the American public is going to wake up to these constant news headlines of sexual harassment, sexual assault in the military ranks. And the American public is going to say, what the hell are these jokers doing? At that point, they're going to try to police us. And we will not like the way they police us. Okay. So first and foremost, the individual professionals in a profession are responsible to police themselves. And if they cannot do it because of whatever, well, you know, he has a family and we didn't want him to get fired. Well, so now you're going to bring down the entire house on all of us. Okay, on our profession, on our credibility, and how we are perceived. Because you felt sorry for Joe, and Joe is a buddy, and you know, he has a wife and kids, and so you kept turning a blind eye. You didn't turn him into the desk sergeant. You didn't turn him into the LT or the captain. You kept supporting him and bringing him along, and now look at what he's done. Sure enough, he brought down the entire house on the entire thing of policing. Right? It didn't just happen. Nothing ever just happens. And again, the role of leadership is to see first and hear first. But they consciously turned a blind eye. Same thing with, you know, if you have a crazy doctor or a crazy politician or a crazy lawyer, you know, it didn't just happen. So the responsibility lies on the professionals in a profession to police up themselves. Or else, trust me, they will come in to police you, and you're not going to like it. You will not like it.
Yeah, that's what's happening right now.
Exactly. Others are policing the police. And what happened with sexual harassment in the military? The politicians up on the Hill, first DOD took it out of the hands of individual GOCOMs, right? General Officer Commands, because they weren't handling it adequately. So the Pentagon took it and they started looking down on what was happening with the sexual harassment and sexual assault cases within units. And that wasn't being done effectively. Now the guys up on the Hill, now they're shining light on it. I said, exactly what I was saying back in 2016. If we don't adequately police up ourselves, they're going to come in to clean up our house. And we're not going to like the way they clean up our house. And that's what's going on with the police force now. Yeah, you can't turn a blind eye, and that's leadership. And that comes back to full circle of how we started this discussion, where leaders have to be pure in their intent and in their hearts. It's not about you. It's got to be selfless. I talked about Dan McNally. I talked about Steph Dawson. I talked about Carl Pfeiffer. In my experience and in my lane, I found these individuals to be totally selfless. Mark Moser, their number one focus is do the Army's work, do the Army's business. I don't want to hear about nothing else. Okay, just take care of the Army's business. The cliques, the parochialism, all this, they're not interested in that. And when you approach your profession that way, you would be able to easily say to Dan Harris or Jose Herrera, hey, you're a screw up. I'm pulling you offline. I'm telling the boss. I'm calling the sergeant. You know, I'm turning your ass in. Absolutely. When that is your mode of operation. Okay. But if you are nefarious in your dealings to begin with, and you're the leader, now you just compounded the problem. You keep turning the blind eye to what's wrong. You know, Martin Luther King, one of his favorite quotes that I love, you know, said, "The time is always right to do the right thing." There is no, well, I got to think about it. No, he's got a wife and kids, or she's my best bud. Nonsense. Think about the organization. Think about the institution. Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny you just said that, because I was gonna ask you if you had any favorite quotes or mottos that you held to you. So you must have
Quite
read
a
my
few.
mind on that one. But
There are quite a few. There are quite a few. Absolutely, and that's one of my favorite ones. The John Maxwell, "Everything rises and falls on leadership," you know, frames it all for me. And as a leader, the time is always right to do the right thing.
yeah,
You know, day, night, I don't care if it's, you know, Christmas Day and you're in the middle of dinner. If you see something wrong, call it. I talked about Colonel Pfeiffer in the book. You know, he had a saying, you know, always as the leader, be ready to point out the nut in the fruit cocktail.
yeah,
You should not have any nuts in a fruit cocktail. Okay, if you got a bowl of fruit cocktail and there are nuts in there,
yeah,
there's something wrong. So
yeah,
I just consider myself very fortunate to have been around these individuals and listened as they talked or mentored or coached others, usually because of some negative situation. I wasn't on the receiving end, but I would be around. And I would always go, okay, Harris, note to self, don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't do that. You know, when you watch your buddy getting smashed up
yeah,
against the wall, and you know, because he did something dumb, um, and you know, you learn from that. But you didn't mind, because even when I was being corrected, I did not mind, because you know, it wasn't being done maliciously or with any negative. This was to fix me, so that I didn't, you know, impact soldiers' lives in the wrong way. And really, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. It's not about me. You know, there are leaders who, colonels, when they were going up one side of me and down the other, I jumped down in the front leaning rest position, and I'm doing push-ups while they're talking, just to make sure the blood is flowing, and it's registering in every cell in my brain. You know, when these people are teaching you and giving you these education, you know, moments, it's an ignorant individual that personalizes and says, "Oh, he's picking on me." No, think about the organization and the soldiers that you are going to be leading.
yeah,
Same thing with my CSM. I think I talked about Command Sergeant Major Boldovic, one of the best human beings I ever run across. That man would give you the shirt off his back in the dead of winter. I learned so much, just, you know, listening to him. And you know, every time I would thank him profusely, and he'd say, "Sir, exactly what me and all the other NCOs do for you, we do for all the other officers. So don't consider yourself unique. The only difference is you listen.
yeah,
And that's what distinguishes you from the others. You listen. So because we see and we know that you listen, we open up and pour our wealth of experience on you." And I was like, "Bring it on. Give me more. I need more." Keep coming, CSM. Keep coming, Command Sergeant Major. Give me more. Absolutely. So, yeah, within any organization, the people in there have to police up themselves, or else it gets out of hand. No one else is qualified to do so. And the leader should never be afraid to call out something that's nutty, that's crazy. But too many don't. I'll share this last thing with you. I've spent more than 30 years in the Army National Guard, both as a reservist and full-time active. Okay. And I can count on one hand the leaders that I would follow blindly. If they showed up right now and said, Harris, follow me, I'm moving. Dan McNally is one of them. Okay, he was a captain, but I'm telling you, as an 05, if he showed up and said, Dan, follow me, I'm moving. Because I know his intentions are selfless. It's about the objective. It's about the organization. It's about the institution. It's not going to be about him. It's not going to be about some personal gain that he's going to get. It's going to be about the organization and the institution. Now, Pfeiffer, Dawson, hey, follow me. I'm on it. And again, just speaking for myself and in my lane, in an organization that, you know, cherishes itself because it produces leaders, that's a very poor record. For just one individual, me, I can count on one hand, not two, the leaders that I've identified or I worked with or had the either unfortunate experience or fortunate experience to have encountered. Just on one hand that I would say, you know, and the one thread that was interwoven between all of these people, because I had to think about it. So what's the connecting dots? What is the relationship between all of these, you know, these five that you identified that you've already worked with, so many others. There are others that were good, okay, but these five really stood out in my mind. And it really boiled down to one very simple thing. They were selfless. They were focused on getting the Army's work done, period. None of all this other stuff, you know. Night or day, 24 hours a day, it was about the Army. And at the end of the day, those are the kinds of leaders you want. Yeah. I saw Captain McNally as a captain go toe-to-toe with a major. He was outranked because the major didn't want to go to the weapons range. And McNally dug in. It's like, if you don't show up to that range, I'm going to mark you on SAT, and I'm going to tell the old man. He didn't turn a blind eye. I'm going to tell the battalion commander. And I think I was in E3. I was like, oh, what's going on here? There's a captain digging in his heels on an 04 and a major. It's like, yeah. You need to show up to the weapons range. You need to qualify like every other soldier. Now remember, the company commander, even though he's outranked, all of those headquarters people are in the company, right? He is responsible, that captain is responsible for their collective training, right? So weapons qual, NBC, you know, all of their briefings, you know, he's got to check off if they've done it. And if they don't want to schmuck it off and say, well, I don't have to do it. He has the right. And at the end of the day, he signs a 1379. They don't get paid. And that's what he told him. He says, I'm not gonna sign your payroll if you don't go to the range. But imagine how many captains wouldn't do that. They'd be like, all right, sir, we'll catch you in the next go round. Yes. Because when we're getting shot at, I want to know that your ass qualified, at least you got marksman. Or else I'm gonna be doing all the work. And then, oh, by the way, I got to tote your lazy ass now off the battlefield. Hell no, that ain't happening. And he went after the cooks. He went after the mechanics. No, we don't shoot. What do you mean you don't shoot? You're a soldier, ain't you? Yeah. So, and that's the kind of leadership I was talking about. And when you turn a blind eye and you don't call out the nut that's in the fruit cocktail, you end up with that police officer in the Floyd case and so many other situations around, whether it's medicine or law or the police force, the fire department, just understand these people are who they are. They're bad people. And it's unfortunate. We took those bad people, we put a military uniform on them. Now they're bad people in military uniforms. Or they're bad people in a judge's, you know, a robe. Or now they're a bad person in a black suit sitting up on the hill. They're just bad people. So, and we're the ones that have to look and identify and say, you know what, you are a nut. This is a fruit cocktail. You don't belong in here. So, yeah, good stuff.
Oh yeah.
But it's been a pleasure and it's been an honor, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I applaud your work. And if there's anything I can do to assist you in your work, please, you've got my contact information. Reach out. My website, of course, it's www.muddybootsleadership.com. You can go on there, leave me notes, or even set an appointment, or just send me a text or a phone call.
Roger that.
I have my capacity is very, very deep. I can handle a lot of information and work. So just bring it on.
Yeah, it seems that way, sir. You're a full book there, so that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you for your energy and
Thank you for having me.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. We have a good night, sir. Appreciate the chat.
Same here.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, take care. Yep.
Thank you, Colonel.
Thank you.